Hey, Carroll.
Thank you, Kyle. Thank you. I will go first. That way, Cord can get up here and mop up, clean up whatever mess I might make. Um, Better him clean up after me than clean up after him. But it's good to be here. I hope you're happy to be here, however you're here, on the premises or via the live stream. So, I will start with a question. What have you and God been up to this week? What have you and God been up to this week? Are there any developments? Yeah, I'm sure there has been, and I know that that's kind of a question that, wait a minute, is he being nosy? I'm sure there has been, and it could be seen. It could be seen if the examination were keen enough. If keen is still a word, remember watching Leave It to Beaver. Wow, that would be keen. So I'm sure there has been some developments, and hopefully they've been positive developments as far as what you and God have been up to this week. Even so, it's rhetorical, obviously. It's a rhetorical question. I wouldn't expect you to be able to answer that off the cuff, and you didn't come here to give an account of yourself, not to me anyway. So you can relax. You can relax. We're not on trial here. Well, not amongst ourselves anyway. But it's kind of a sober consideration, isn't it? If you get asked the question, what have you and God been up to this past week since I saw you last, if you were here last week, or what you and God have been up to regardless of whether I saw you last week or not. So I wouldn't expect you to be able to answer that, but it is kind of not off the cuff. If you had time to think about it, you could probably give me some things that have developed in your relationship with God this week. It is a sober consideration, or at least it is for me. If someone were to ask me seriously, what's been the developments between you and God? How has your relationship progressed or digressed or whatever in the past week? I have a notion that that's part of the reason for a meeting like this, and it's why meetings like this still take place, right? We get to come to the island of misfit toys, and we get to see once again that we're not alone in the world, that there's other struggles, that there's other things going on, and whatever we're going through, lots of times there's people going through things that are much more serious. And going through this prayer request list today with some of you kind of makes your heart heavy to hear about some of the things that people are going through. But we do get to see that we're not alone, and I think it's also easier to face God as a group than facing Him alone sometimes. But that's in all honesty, that's principal's office woodshed kind of view, isn't it? That we have to be cowed down, or that we have to be afraid to appear before God. Hopefully that's not frequent, that we have that principal's office woodshed view of God, because we're not always in trouble. We're just not. And I hope that's not frequent, and certainly not the face that we seek, because mostly it's the lap of love, that place of safety and strength that we crave and look forward to. And I think that's another reason that we come here, because we have such a hard time out in the world sometimes. Sometimes we have good weeks, but a lot of times we don't. And it's good to come here for the refresher and to be built up, hopefully, and encouraged, and to hear about God. So it's that lap of love, safety, and strength, the place where we feel hopefully our best. What Philippians 4:13 tells us, that place, right, where we can do all things. I personally can do all things through Him who strengthens me. That's what we're looking for. That's, it's not being taken to the woodshed always. And that place that we feel our best, because we know in our hearts that God is for our victory and not our defeat. Because if we think of ourselves as the children that He's called to Himself, to rule with Him eventually, that's a pretty heavy program, isn't it? That's a serious work. That's a serious program that we're in. To become kings and priests, to be rulers with God eventually. So, what if? What if? What if God calls your name this week? And maybe you could tell me, when I say, what have you and God been up to this past week, you could say, well, He called my name this week. There's been a huge development. I think I would have already heard that if that had happened, but I don't know those things. So what if God calls your name this week? And I don't mean like a lot of the world calls. I don't mean call you home, because that's what you read in the obituaries. The Lord called so-and-so home this past week. Okay. But I don't mean call you home. I mean calls your name. The Lord came and stood there, calling as at other times, Samuel, Samuel. Then Samuel said, speak, for your servant is listening. And the Lord said to Samuel, see, I am about to do something. He said, see, I am about to do something in Israel that will make the ears of everyone who hears about it tingle. 1 Samuel 3, 10 and 11. He came and stood there calling as at other times, because if you're familiar with that story, and I'm sure that you are, Samuel was serving Eli, and when he had laid down one night, he heard his name called, and he says, here I am, and he goes to Eli, and Eli says, I didn't call you, go back to bed. And this happens a couple of different times. And Eli finally gives him the instruction, listen. He figures out what's going on. He says, go lay back down, and if you hear the voice again, this is how you respond. And that's what Samuel did. And the Lord said to him, I am about to do something in Israel that will make the ears of everyone who hears about it tingle. Now, if Samuel would have been sitting in this service the next day, and I said, hey, Samuel, what have you and God been up to this past week? Well, it's funny you should ask. God said to me that I am about to do something that will make the ears of everyone who hears about it tingle. Now, that's an encounter with God, isn't it? It was an angel, it says, that was coming and saying his voice. But when he answered, speak, for your servant is listening. Yeah. And then to have those words, that's an encounter. And when I say, what if God calls your name this week, and but preacher, surely you don't expect. Well, I don't. But what I do know is that expectation is not a qualifier. God is pretty good at the unexpected. Pardon me, my Lord, how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family. Remember the story of Gideon? He was out on the threshing floor, and his name got called Mighty Warrior. Pardon me, my Lord, but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest, and I am the least in the family. That's in Judges 6, if you care to know. And then there's the one we just talked about, Samuel, not as a boy, but as he's grown up and he becomes the prophet. And he goes to Jesse, and he sees all the sons of Jesse. They get paraded before him because Samuel's been told, you need to anoint another king because Saul's not getting the job done, right? So he sees all these sons, and he says, are these all the sons that you have? He asks Jesse. Well, they're still the youngest, but he's out somewhere out here tending sheep. Bring him. And then Samuel is told, again with an encounter, or a voice at least of God, rise and anoint. This is the one. Another encounter. And we know the encounters that David has with God. Yeah, maybe not on the same, maybe not quite on the same level as Samuel, but there's a lot. And there's Joseph the dreamer. Joseph the dreamer. sold by his brothers. He's sold into slavery. He's put in jail. Well, he's brought out of slavery, and he's put to work in Potiphar's house, and then he gets in trouble. He doesn't really get in trouble. He gets trouble put on him. Goes to jail, gets out of jail, and all these different, and it finally ends up becoming the second in command of Egypt. But all these things where God has petitioned, God has done the unexpected, right? So if you say, well, surely you don't expect that God's going to call my name, that God could call my name or would, but he can. And God is, again, good at the unexpected. And it kind of makes me smile inside, brethren, because we hear these conversations, we sit back here at the table and we talk about it when during Bible studies and different things. And we talk about things that are to come to pass. How will we know? What will we see? What should we look for? Where are we already? And it's kind of like we have those conversations as if though our only job is going to be spectators. And I know we don't believe that, but sometimes those conversations, if someone didn't know better, they would think that. But Ephesians 6 doesn't describe spectator apparel to me. And do we think about Joel 2:28 and Acts 2:17? It's about busyness, not a good seat, because it says your sons and daughters, I don't want to butcher it, because Acts 2 is referring to Joel 2. It says your sons and daughters will prophesy, your young people or young men, it says, but doesn't have to be males, will see visions, and your old people will dream dreams and so forth. So again, that's about busyness to me, not just a good seat so we can be spectators. Now, that opening question, what have you and God been up to this week? Imagine that question to Moses after his encounter. Again, someone who's tending sheep out at Horeb, and he sees this oddity, and I'm going to go see what this is. And as he approaches, he hears his name, Moses. Moses. And of course, it's hard for me to even say that and not think about the scene from the Ten Commandments and even hear that voice. But nonetheless, the event happened. He saw this oddity. He goes to check it out. His name is called, and Moses says, as did not Samuel. Samuel said, I am listening. Moses says, here I am. It's kind of like Moses' story is kind of like Joseph in reverse. Moses goes from the prince of Egypt to a fugitive, and of course Joseph went from all of his problems up to the second in command in Egypt. But you think about Moses and you think about the journey, the work, the frustrations that he went through. And I'm reading this morning in Deuteronomy, and I want you to turn with me there, Deuteronomy chapter 34. Again, and I always say this, brethren, or typically say it, that I can't present any scripture to you that is not already familiar to you if you're familiar with your Bible at all. And I know you're familiar with this because it's the last chapter of Deuteronomy. It says, then Moses climbed Mount Nebo from the plains of Moab. Deuteronomy 34 and verse 1. Then Moses climbed Mount Nebo from the plains of Moab to the top of Pisgah across from Jericho. There the Lord showed him the whole land from Gilead to Dan, all of Naphtali, the territory of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as the Mediterranean Sea, the Negev, and the whole region from the valley of Jericho to the city of palms as far as Zor. Then the Lord said to him, this, Moses, is the land I promised by an oath. I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob when I said, I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you will not cross over into it. And Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in Moab, as the Lord had said. He buried him in Moab, in the valley opposite Beth Peor. But to this day no one knows where his grave is. Moses was 120 years old when he died, yet his eyes were not weak, nor his strength gone. The Israelites grieved for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days, until the time of weeping and mourning was over. Again, this person who had been the prince of Egypt. He kills the Hebrew and he flees, or the Egyptian over the Hebrew. And he flees. He meets a lot of the family of Jethro, and then Jethro gives him Zipporah for his wife. We know that story. Here he is out here tending sheep, and he sees this oddity, and he has this encounter with God. And he goes through this whole journey that we know all about, not just from the movie, but from the story, about the Exodus from Egypt, and the 40 years of sojourning, and so forth and so on. But then here's this first 8 verses of Deuteronomy 34. And after all of that, I had to think on it. Think, man, from the calling, all of Moses' life, what he had been through, all the things he had gone through from the start of the Exodus to the end, to where he finds himself up here being shown the promised land but cannot enter in. So you do have to think on that, because it's heavy. Because you think somehow it's kind of like you read about the workers in the vineyard and you think it's not, or the workers in the field, and it's not fair. What Moses did. Now, the common understanding we get from Numbers 20:24 is that Moses or Aaron was allowed to, because that verse says, Aaron will be gathered to his people. He will not enter the land that I give the Israelites, because both of you rebelled against my command at the waters of Meribah. And if you go back and read that story, it's with the water from the rock. They were in the desert of Zin, or whatever it was called. And, okay, if you'll go up and follow my, take your staff and speak, right? But he didn't do that. He struck the stone with his staff. And according to Numbers 20:24, that's why this happened. But it also makes you think of Moses and Elijah. Because these are two. It says no one knows where Moses' grave is. Elijah was carried up in a whirlwind. We don't know exactly how all that ended up, but it's also Moses and Elijah that were at the Mount of Transfiguration. We don't know where their graves are. Not that it could be found, even if we knew where. It says no one knows to this day where Moses' grave was, even though he was buried where it describes. But as hard as Deuteronomy 34 looks, perhaps there is some tenderness in that too. Because I happen to think, especially thinking about Moses and Elijah, is that there is unfinished business, or there is unfinished busyness. And there has been speculation about Moses and Elijah being the end-time prophets, or the end-time witnesses, the two witnesses. I don't know that. That's up to God. But there was a penalty, obviously, for not following God's instructions explicitly. Did Moses misunderstand? Take your staff and speak to the stone? Did it mean, or was it an outburst? Was it taking credit for? Must we bring water forth from this stone? We don't know. We can speculate and we can talk about it. But it's hard. But I think there may be some tenderness in that too, because Daniel 12:4 says, many shall run to and fro. And this is talking about the latter days. It addresses that as the latter days in Daniel 4. In Daniel 12, verse 4, it says, in the latter days many shall run to and fro, and knowledge will be increased. Now, what do we know is the beginning of knowledge? Fear of the Lord, right? So there's a little bit of that when I say, what have you and God been up to this past week? Or if I ask you, what if God calls your name this week? When I gave a message here, I don't remember if it was at the feast, or since the feast, but it wasn't before that. And I was talking about the signs and the things that people put on these signs, and is this the best thing you can do? Is this the best testimony you have, or the best witness you have? It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God, or God is a consuming fire, or these things that people put out there. Well, I've had to eat crow a little bit since then, because it is a dreadful thing to fall into the hands of a living God. And you can sit there in your seat and say, well, you can't say that it makes you completely comfortable if you were to seriously consider God may call my name this week, as he did Samuel, as he did Moses, as he did Gideon, and give me this huge task. Am I ready? Could I do it? Not just what am I going to see, what am I going to look for, when is it going to happen, when will we get there? He's asking me to be a player. He's asking me to be part of getting the ball rolling. What do you do? What would be your answer? Now, to me, Moses' answer and Samuel's answer is a little bit different. Moses had a little more, he left it a little more wide open. Here I am. I don't know what I'm willing to do, but I'm here. You know, what is it? What do you got? Samuel was instructed by Eli. But I think we know, based on Hannah's prayer, if you read, you know that Hannah's prayer was answered. If you will give me a son, I will dedicate him to you. Once that son came, we don't know. Maybe we'll get to ask Hannah one day, what was it like when you held that son, remembered your promise to God, afraid to renege on that promise? Well, God, I know that I said, but if you'll give me one more son. No. Hannah prayed a prayer. A very sincere, heartfelt, and if you've read that prayer recently, you know what I mean. So much that some people ask, is she drunk? Or what's, you know. But she dedicated, so my point is, I think Samuel was born, and maybe Moses, you know, Moses has got a story too. And what fascinated me this morning is that everything we know about Moses up to becoming the Prince of Egypt is in a chapter and a half. Not even that, because the first part of the first chapter describes of Exodus, kind of just sets it up. And then Moses is born. His mom has him for 3 months. She puts him in the ark of bulrushes. She puts him out on the river. The princess gets him, and you think, wow. You know, we can see movies that make his life from infancy to manhood long, but Scripture covers it in a skinny minute. He did this, and then when he was grown, you know, and it's like, where does Yul Brynner and his brother Ramses and all, yeah, fit into all this? But anyway, it all takes place. It all takes place pretty quick. So Samuel was born to do what he did. Moses, I think, was the same. But Moses said, "Here I am." What else is there? And he still, we know the story, that he wasn't very agreeable to what God was asking him to do. Samuel said, "Speak. Your servant is listening." I don't know which one I would be. If God were to call my name this week, or any week, would I be the "here I am," or would I be the "I'm out of here"? It'd be like a cartoon. You'd see a little puff of smoke and some lines going this way. Yeah, because it's a scary thing. It is a dreadful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. But God is pretty good at the unexpected. We don't know exactly what to expect. And even if we did, if we thought we knew, if we expected it, God might not do it. It's like we've said about no one knows the time of the second coming. And even if someone were to stumble onto it, God might change it. Oh, so there you go. Nobody's going to know. So we don't know exactly what to expect. And if we expect, and even if we did, it may not happen. Just remember, brethren, God is about our victory and not our defeat. The Lord came and stood there as at the other times. Samuel, calling as at the other times. Samuel, speak, for your servant is listening, Samuel said. And the Lord said to Samuel, "See, I'm about to do something in Israel that will make the ears of everyone who hears about it tingle." There's going to be some tingling ears one day. And I don't know if it's you or if it's me or if it's somebody even more unexpected. But we know some things are going to happen. And we know that we're told to suit up. We're supposed to put on the helmet of salvation, the breastplate of righteousness, have the truth around our waist, have our feet prepared with the gospel of peace. The shield of our faith and the sword of the Spirit. All these things. It's not spectator apparel, is it? If God calls your name, suit up. We have to suit up anyway. We have to be working on that outfit all the time, don't we? And how often do we realize, forgot my helmet? Where's my shield? My sword's not ready. Somebody's asked me a question and I don't know the answer. It's there, the chinks in the armor. And that's why we're constantly working on it and constantly trying harder, hopefully. What are you and God going to be up to this week? What if He calls your name? Well, that's unexpected. Our next message will be by Cord Wilkes.